Good afternoon, everybody, and it's great to be in Adelaide. As Dino mentioned, I coordinate a group at Monash University, but really here to speak today about what my view of the future of construction is or could be. Maybe prompt a bit of a debate with those of you in the room. But in line with Dino's acknowledgement of country, I'd just like to start by saying that at Monash, we acknowledge the Wurundjeri and Bunurong people of the Kulin Nations, where we live and work. It's a key piece of our research to look into the context of the construction industry, and that way of knowing place is a really key presence in the way that we conduct our research. And today I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting on the Kaurna people's lands and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So a little bit about me. As Dino mentioned, I coordinate a group at Monash University looking at the industrialization of building. We come at it from three perspectives. That's the building systems, the parts, how they're increasingly digitalized, and the processes that sit behind those, and increasingly the opportunity presented by decarbonization of the construction industry, which really is a key challenge. I lead a program of research within the Australian federal government's largest funding mechanism for built environment research, Building 4.0 CRC, and that's a 7-year program of research that will run through until 2027. So, into the content. What do I see as the future of construction? Well, for me, it's about platforms. And before I get to platforms, why is it that we should think about the future of construction? Well, Dino flicked up a couple of statistics, but I'll leave you with a few triggers to start off the conversation. There are social, cultural issues really around gender balance in the industry, but also an aging demographic. It's an industry that is challenged. It has a perception of being a dirty, a messy industry, not utilizing technology to its greatest potential, perhaps. It's a significant contributor to any state's economy, and typically representing a sort of 12 to 15% bandwidth, and yet it's seen an incredibly low level of productivity gain in recent decades, and that's in contrast to other dominant sectors. And I mentioned before the decarbonization agenda. So construction is the largest consumer of raw materials. It's a significant producer of waste. But I believe that through industrialization we can tackle, in fact it's the only way that we can tackle construction's environmental impact. So these are just three areas of focus in terms of the context, but I'm very happy to discuss later the broader mandate for change. I want to start by saying that ideas about the future of construction are not new. This is an image from 1891 about the future architect sitting on the construction site, pushing buttons, having a machine deliver a building. This is perhaps no different to the visions we see today about 3D printing, about advanced manufacturing and the contribution that the architectural design community can play in the future of construction. And exactly 100 years ago, Walter Gropius, Adolf Meyer put together a kit of standardized parts that they thought would represent housing, a way of delivering housing more effectively, more efficiently for the future. But what progress have we seen? Well, across the 20th century, there are a number of stop-start efforts looking at ways of producing buildings off-site, transporting them to site, ways of breaking down buildings into kit of parts design methodologies. And again, these are themes that we deal with in our research today, and yet these are ideas that sit 70, 80, 90 plus years ago. Ideas about technology and the future of living environments is certainly not new. And again, there's a high point, again, the architectural community playing a role, proposing design-led thinking in this, the small homes service of the 1950s. But fundamentally, going back to 1891, the vision of today's construction site really hasn't shifted a great deal. There's not the architect sitting, controlling, pushing buttons and machines delivering buildings, but we still are using, perhaps the only different would be battery-powered hand tools rather than the pull handsaw. But many of these practices are baked in, and for good reason. And so what's the good reason? Well, there are certain challenges to changing construction, and they come down to three perspectives of change. Changing sites, the changing place, changing teams, stakeholder groups, and changing unique products that we deliver as an industry. And those challenges of change are compounded by the industry structure, where we see many stakeholders tiered, layered, applying margins, and creating ultimately very expensive products. But I wouldn't be here if I didn't think that construction can progress and can change. I'm an optimist, and I mentioned earlier the role that decarbonization is going to play in that change. And for me, it comes to thinking about construction beyond projects. We have to deliver buildings in a place. We have to deliver them with changing stakeholders, different clients, and we have to change and adapt the product form. But I think that the fundamental way of thinking about the change is to think about construction as platforms. Platform is a bit of a buzzword. Here are just a number of examples of what a platform can be. And in construction, that buzzword has emerged in a number of different ways over the last decade. But today I want to speak about two specifically: product platforms, and then the emergence of digital platforms in construction. Product platforms come out of manufacturing. Again, around about 100 years ago. This is mass production approach introduced by Henry Ford. And in response to Henry Ford's mass production innovation of the Model T Ford, we saw General Motors, Alfred Sloan, propose product families. And product families were a way of aggregating the General Motors suite of products, present them to a market, but look for commonality of production and identity, while presenting the market with a bit of differentiation. And that differentiation was handled by a technical asset, typically in the chassis, that emerged in the 60s and 70s, and then has been driven forward by multinational companies like Volkswagen, utilizing modular design principles to deliver streams of products that ultimately rely on the same components. And we've seen product platforms be used in other manufacturing industries. Aircraft production is always touted as a great example. And it doesn't just affect the technical components, but filters through into aspects of skills and training. So this is the two examples on the screen are examples of the Airbus A320 and A340 aircraft, fundamentally different, but comparable, meaning that airlines that utilize Airbus aircraft have reduced staff training costs when they move between their products. And so what product platforms do is they establish common assets, the physical components, the parts of the product that are reconfigured to deliver variability, standardized common processes that guide and control the supply chain, and ways of managing knowledge as an industry in order to guide internally the people, as well as externally an organization's interactions with its supply chain. And so what does this mean for construction? How is it made real? Well, looking overseas, we see product platforms emerging in off-site prefabricated building environments. Product platforms get utilized to drive modular design principles, layouts, configurations of apartments in the simplest forms, and they guide the components, technical decisions, and set in place standardized processes for how these components are made. In an off-site environment, we see greater workforce participation and a very different culture of production, continual improvement, and team dynamics emerge. In the most technical sense, we see streamlined building regulations where we have standardized approved products be kitted out, fitted out through design into variable apartment layouts in the case of Limbex. But we also see the creation of a knowledge base or an asset that continually improves. And this is an example, another Swedish contractor with a patented building system that they take out into the market. And effectively, it's a kit of parts. It's that image that we saw from 1947. We're seeing companies realize that vision and make it successful through the utilization of an alternate business model for construction. So this is not designing a product for one-off use, but it's designing a product that has baked-in IP and is developed consistently over time through multiple project-based deployments. And similarly, in the case of Duncan Maxwell, we see integration of complex building services models, so standardizing not just the wall build-ups, not just the superstructure, but looking at the smarts of the building, and that really then is the building services. So this raises a number of key questions. Often when I present examples of Sweden, I hear people say, well, Australia is a big country, it's very different to Sweden. Sweden's a cold country, Australia is a hot country. Where are the parallels? For me, it comes down to factors like the cost of labor, GDP per capita, the distances that these products are trucked from the north of Sweden down to the south is about 1,500 kilometers. It isn't really a small country. But more deeply, for me, the question with that Swedish model is, as an Australian, how can their success be replicated here? What are our expectations of design? I think they are fundamentally different to Northern Europe. Questions of aesthetics, of cultural preference. How can these product platforms be scaled, not just to deal in one single sector, multi-residential in their case, but what are the implications for school building, for hospitals, for other major pieces of infrastructure? And importantly, these businesses that I've shown are dealing in an off-site prefabricated environment, but what are the implications for the on-site building supply chain? Because that is not going to disappear. So I think there's a view of the future where we see product platforms merge with the digital future and present a holistic vision. And so this is where I'll now step in to talk about digital platforms. Digital platforms have a theoretical alignment to product platforms, utilizing digital infrastructure, leveraging data, which is comparable to knowledge, and creating a networked community of participants, the people or the supply chain. But it's through these digital connections that we're then able to deliver perhaps more nuance of product type. And we've seen these digital smarts be baked into product platforms and utilized in a less centralized vision than Sweden through the work of Bride and Wood in the UK, who delivered the Forge in London as part of a cross-disciplinary team, again, overcoming some of those barriers of having a changing stakeholder mix. But we're also seeing product platforms merge with the digital advanced manufacturing future through the example of Intelligent City in Canada, an organization that is, on the one hand, forming a very sophisticated off-site manufacturing environment, but also creating parametric generative design tools on the other, such that the digital design environment directly corresponds and relates to their production capability. And so this automation and robotics, again, maybe we are starting to get a little bit closer to that view of 1891 of the architect sitting and pushing buttons and producing a building at the end of the process. But we also see digital platforms emerging with a little bit more nuance, and this is where we step into the supply chain and create digital environments where we have matchmaking of capabilities. And this is really important when we think about the delivery of large and complex social infrastructure. But at the core, one of the most fundamental changes that I think will drive a push towards greater industrialization is the leveraging of design. As Dino mentioned, I'm an architect in training, and it's through artificial intelligence that I think we are going to witness some of the strongest changes. And this is where we have generative design models beginning to emerge, guiding creative processes, but changing the role of designer. But a lot of my architectural colleagues are happy to do the research, the creative work, to look at these stable diffusion models, where you can tell a stable diffusion model, I want to create a hospital atrium, and it will generate an image. But the key piece for me is, how do we then build that? And this is where the coupling up of digital platforms with product platforms really presents a pathway for the future, such that these generative architectural design models immediately know the cost the production implications and the supply chain implications of how the thing gets built. And that's fundamentally what my research group focuses on. So I said that platforms are a buzzword, but not without cause. There's been a significant amount of private sector investment. And pointing to that example earlier, Bryden Wood, we've also seen significant government investment in seeing a platform-based view of construction emerge. And I believe that we're sitting on the cusp of a fundamental shift in the way that we deliver buildings as a society on a pathway to decarbonization through industrialized building methods. That vision perhaps changes the traditional industry structure from being hierarchical and competitive to one that is perhaps a little bit more collaborative and rests in exchanges of knowledge, exchange of data, and that exchange is facilitated by a centralized platform, such that we have greater transparency and certainty when commissioning buildings. But there's always perhaps a dark side, and if I say platform, then immediately we think of the Silicon Valley examples of the platform economy. And there are these social questions that sit underneath those about workforce participation and what that digital future means out in society. But it's my hope that through research and through close collaboration of government, industry, and research, that we're able to look for these opportunities as well as threats and collectively co-design a pathway forwards. So I want to leave you with my positive vision for platform-based economy for construction. And it starts with benchmarking. Construction is fundamentally bad at capturing data about performance. It's a project-based one-off utilization of a team for a project, and the KPIs come down to cost and time. But there's detail in those projects. And if we're able to capture that detail and the data out of those, then we can move towards a footing of continual improvement. And perhaps that footing of continual improvement can lead to platform-based construction. So we must capture and use this data. I think there's an equipping and an upskilling that's necessary into the digital future, particularly as we look to decarbonize, and that is that we must find an open mode of operation. I think one of the success stories out of Sweden isn't necessarily just that platform-based view of apartment delivery, but it is an openness in the society. And every time I've gone there, the factories have been open, the teams have said, come on in, have a look, let us know if you think that anything can be improved. And I think that is a really healthy environment to have as an industry. And I think that openness can point towards new pathways where we can equip the existing industry with the correct conditions to change. And then the final positive vision is about empowerment. So I mentioned construction's power in the economy. It's very powerful socially. We're in a building right now. Buildings, the built environment, it is integral to our everyday life. And therefore, construction represents a huge potential for wider community benefit. And I think that we should all be working together to make our buildings better year on year. And there's an immense social and environmental power behind that for the future. I'll hand back to Dino. Thank you.
Thanks, mate. Stay up here with me, bud, because I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. So we had a few questions come through, and you nicely answered some of them at the end there. So first one I'll ask, and we'll try and do this quick, because we're already behind time, but why is Australia always an adopter rather than an innovator? Or at least maybe in the construction sector, we'll say. Any thoughts on that?
I think...
Come here.
Yeah. For me, it's maybe not popular, but I think there's an easiness to life. You know, I grew up in Scotland. I come to Australia. It's a temperate climate, by and large. It doesn't have those extremes that perhaps Northern Europe has, or the tropics, you know, the true tropics have. So when we look at built environment, it's very easy to design, get approved a kind of mediocre built form response.
Sure.
But I think there's an opportunity to be leaders. I think that we are seeing the conditions for change emerge, particularly around decarbonisation. Australia is in some ways, especially in the built environment, behind the game, but that points to significant opportunities for growth and to leverage connections into Southeast Asia and to become a pivot point and a leader because, yeah, even in our research, strong connections to Europe, immense opportunity in Southeast Asia, so opportunities there.
Yeah, there's 250 million people living in Indonesia, so there's an opportunity there, I would have thought. Lots of questions are coming in now, but I can only ask one more, so sorry. What do you see as the single largest challenge for our industry to transition to a more industrialised mindset to meet the future demand? And I think that's relevant too, because there is a scaremongering around like the robots are taking our jobs, but that graph said that we need something to help us.
Yeah.
So.
No, I think, I see it as skills and training. So I think that there's a huge opportunity even in architecture. The role of the architect 10 years from now could look completely different. This is a diversification of skill sets. Sure, the traditional industry will be there. The architects are happy to do the 2 or 3% of the built environment. But I think there's a real opportunity for growth there, but also just more generally, skills and training when it comes to the trades, when it comes to construction project management. But that's also, there's a latency, there's a weight of the traditional industry that is maybe a challenging to overcome, but I think it starts with training and looking to the next generation to help then create a force for change.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you. We thank Duncan again.